One of the brand new technologies introduced in this version of FoxtrotOne is the ability to work directly with Microsoft Excel and Excel workbooks. This is really a nice feature, especially if your data comes to you in an Excel format that cannot be imported directly into Foxtrot, like a CSV file. An example might be a form, kind of a spaced form where information is on different lines, different columns, and it's not something that's tabular that can be easily imported. Well, Foxtrot can now work with those workbooks starting in Excel 2000 all the way through the latest version of Excel 2010. So whichever version of Excel you have, you can start using this new technology. So to kind of go a little bit more in depth on what Foxtrot can work with in Excel, we've shown a couple of things here. The first is the actual Excel application, and you can deal with that by targeting the title bar, which is number 1 in the image on the screen. You can work with the workbook by targeting the Select All button, which is just to the left of the column A header indicated by number 2 on the screen. Number 3 is columns. You can drag and drop to a column header like column C, and you can deal with an entire column. Rows you can deal with by targeting the row number as indicated by number 4 on the screen. You can deal directly with individual cells as indicated by number 5 on the screen. And lastly, you can deal with the worksheets down at the bottom of the workbook as indicated by number 6. We've given you over 60 actions to deal with these Excel workbooks. So it's perfectly equipped to do heavy lifting, whether you need to fill out Excel forms driven by a database of information, or let's say you need to go through 1,000 different workbooks and harvest that information and put it into a single database file. Foxtrot has the tools to do that. So for this demonstration, what I've done is I've created a blank Excel workbook form, and you'll see here this is basically an empty form, and the first task that I want to complete is I want Foxtrot to take a database of information, and for every record in that database I want it to fill out this form and save this as its own copy of the workbook. So essentially I'd be able to produce a workbook for every record that I need to run. So I'm going to go ahead and start by switching over to my task that will do that for us. And I'm first going to run this for you, and so you can see kind of the end result of what this can do for you. And then we'll take a moment and learn how that was made. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my database. This is the information or the records that I need to produce. I want to produce one workbook for every record. And for demo purposes, I'm going to run the first 5 records. So you can see Foxtrot produce 5 individual workbooks. You'll see Foxtrot is going to open up these workbooks, populate those, and save those one by one. Now the neat thing about this is a task that can actually be completed while I'm doing something else on my computer. And I know a lot of you FoxtrotOne users are probably surprised. You'll see that Foxtrot is capable of working with Excel spreadsheets in the background, just like you've experienced using the Foxtrot LE product. So it went through all 5 of those while I was able to keep working on my machine. And if I look in this results folder, you'll see that Foxtrot produced one file for each record that it ran. So I can open up any one of these given files and see that information stored as a separate file. So that's a simple example of creating multiple workbooks from a single database file. Now what if you've got the opposite situation? What if you've got lots of different workbook files and you need to gather that information into a single database? Well, using the Foxtrot technology, you can do that as well. So I've written another task over here that's going to read the workbooks, and what this is going to do is it's going to locate the workbook that's associated with the record I'm looking at, and it's going to open up these one by one, and it's going to write all this information to a single CSV file for me. And this actually occurs quite quickly. You'll see it rapidly opens up these workbooks one by one, very quickly gathers that information, and sends it to a consolidated file. So now if we go back out, you'll see Foxtrot has produced this gathered information file. And if we were to open this, we can see here, this is the information that it was able to gather. It grabbed the last name, balance, and officer code off of those 5 different workbooks and put those together for us in kind of an aggregated report. So I'm sure many of you who are responsible for generating monthly reports where you have to go to many different sources, oftentimes different workbooks that are generated from different departments, you can now write a Foxtrot script to go out, open up all these different workbooks that have the desired information and aggregate that into a single report or a file. So let's kind of see how we can do some of this stuff with Foxtrot. So let me first start by opening up a brand new workbook. And we'll kind of give you the basics of how you do this. Now we have over 60 actions, so we're not going to cover everything today, but we're going to give you enough that will at least get you started. So let me switch over to a new task and we'll start writing some new steps. Okay, the very first thing that happens when you want to interact with the workbook is you simply drag and drop to it like you do any other target. And you'll notice as your selector is over the workbook, you'll notice a green bar along the top that says connect to this workbook. That's telling you that you don't yet have a connection to this workbook. So when you let go, you'll be met with a little wizard here that says, hey, a new workbook has been targeted, and we're going to designate this as workbook A. Now you do have the ability of choosing a different letter if you want to go with a different one. But we'll always give you the next one that's not used. So when we click OK, we now see in our Excel view of Foxtrot that Book 1 is designated as Connection A. Now, whenever I build steps to deal with this workbook, it's not going to be tied to the workbook name. It's going to be tied to the connection. And this is what allows me to write the steps for one workbook. Let's say I'm gathering information. And I can repeatedly open up different workbooks and my actions continue to work regardless of what workbook I have open. So to demonstrate that, now that we have our connection, you'll see that Foxtrot can now dive into and lock on to individual cells. You'll see if you go up to the column headers, you can lock on to columns. It can lock on to rows. You can lock on to the sheets at the bottom. And if you go to the corner, the top left corner of the workbook, the Select All button is how you can target the entire workbook. And the very last thing that you can target is the actual title bar of Excel. So I'm going to start by targeting the title bar, and we'll see what type of things that we can do when we target the title bar. You'll see here we have ways that we can create a workbook, open a workbook. We also have some other things that are standard when you're dealing with an entire window, like the close window action. So this is how you can open workbooks, even arrange them. So if you've got 3 workbooks open at the same time, you can tile those vertically or horizontally. Now when you target the workbook itself, you'll see that different Excel actions are made available. So it's very similar to when you target anything else. Based on what you target, what's selected, we give you the actions that pertain to that particular target. So you never have to guess whether or not this action will work with this target, because we only give you the things that will work with the target. So we see here that we targeted A. We see that we're locking on to the entire workbook. And then beneath that, we're met with a whole slew of different things that we can run, or different actions we can make for the workbook. An example might be, I want to close that workbook. You can do that. You can save it. You can print it. There's lots of different things that you can do. And so think of these actions here as the same type of actions that you'd find in the toolbars of Excel. Most of the things that you can do in Excel are now available directly in your Foxtrot script. So just as a simple example, I can target a cell and I can choose to send information to that cell with our send data action, just like I'm sending information to a text box. You'll see it creates the send data and then it enters it into that particular cell. Now when we target a cell, it automatically locks on to the cell that you've dropped the selector on. In this case it's B2. But let's say I wanted to get a little more finite or more control over what I'm targeting here. Well, we can click this button off to the right here, and this will allow us to, instead of having a hard-coded B2 here, we could use variables to drive this address. We could also deal with a cell range. So let's say I wanted to deal with cell A1 through cell C5. So now I'm dealing with a range of cells. I can choose to send data. And you see Foxtrot is capable of going through and dealing with a large block of cells, and you don't have to go through the cells one by one. So this is a nice powerful tool that you can make large sweeping changes to a workbook if you need to. So you'll notice that as you target the columns, you'll get, again, different actions that pertain only to the columns. So if I needed to clear this column, I could format that column and make things bold in that column if I needed to. There's lots of different things that you can do. You can select the column, move it, change the width of the column. So the names of these actions are fairly self-explanatory. If I want to delete the column, I pick the delete column action. So there's really no need to go through each of these individually because they're pretty self-explanatory. You'll get the same thing for rows, and then if you go down to sheets, you'll notice that you have the capability of switching sheets. If I wanted to say I want to select the next sheet over, Foxtrot will switch over to sheet 2. So you can see we give you the fundamental building blocks to build very sophisticated things in Excel.